Let me talk to you for a minute. See, healing, true healing, isn't about pretending like the pain never happened. It's not about slapping on a smile and convincing the world you're okay. No, real healing is integration. It's when the pieces of you once broken, once scattered by trauma, regret, or disappointment, start finding their way back home. Now you may not even realize it, but if you listen closely to yourself, to your patterns, your energy, your presence, you will see the signs. Let me walk you through what those signs look like. Not from theory, but from lived experience, from the grind of personal growth. When you begin to heal through integration, one of the most powerful and telling signs is that you stop reacting and you start responding. That might sound subtle on the surface, but it's everything. Because reaction is survival. Response, that's consciousness, that's growth. That's the evidence that your nervous system, your emotions, and your soul are no longer in a tug of war. They're starting to work together. See, a reaction is automatic. It's fast, impulsive, often driven by fear, pain, or old trauma. It's what happens when the inner child, the wounded version of you, takes the wheel and hits the gas without thinking. You get criticized, then you snap. Someone triggers you, and suddenly you're defending yourself like it's a war. You get uncomfortable, and you run, lash out, shut down, or over-explain. Reactions are the echoes of unprocessed pain, old programs running in the background. They're not evidence of who you are. They're echoes of who you were in moments of survival. But when you're healing through integration, something starts to shift. You begin to notice the space between the trigger and the choice. You begin to feel the urge to react. And instead of going on autopilot, you breathe, you pause. That pause is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's power. It means you're no longer being dragged around by your impulses. You're learning to feel the heat without being burned by it. That's the kind of transformation that doesn't always get loud applause, but it's the root of lasting change. You start asking different questions. Instead of, how dare they treat me like that? You ask, why did that bother me so deeply? Instead of, what's wrong with them? You ask, what am I still carrying that this just touched? You stop blaming everything on the outside world and start doing the internal work of understanding your triggers, your stories, your wounds, not to condemn yourself, but to reclaim power from the chaos. And the beautiful part is, this doesn't mean you stop feeling. You still get angry, you still get hurt, you still get annoyed, but your emotions no longer hijack the conversation. They become information, not commands. And that's key. Because emotions are not enemies, they're messengers. When you're integrated, you don't ignore them and you don't obey them blindly either. You listen, you get curious, you decide. That's not just emotional intelligence, that's emotional ownership. People around you will notice too. Where you used to escalate, now you de-escalate. Where you used to explode, now you express, you communicate instead of retaliate. You protect your peace without burning bridges. And don't get it twisted, this is not about being passive or soft. This is about having authority over your inner world so that no one on the outside gets to control how you show up. It doesn't mean you always get it right. You'll still slip, you'll still react sometimes. But even when you do, there's a new voice inside, gentle, wise, grounded, that says, let's look at that. Let's learn from that. You don't shame yourself anymore. You observe, you adjust, you evolve. That's the sign of someone who's not just trying to appear healed, but who is actually doing the work. So when you find yourself pausing in moments where you used to explode, when you start choosing your next move instead of being ruled by your last wound, when you feel the fire rise inside of you and still find the clarity to speak from grace, not grief, not too small, that's monumental. That's healing. That's integration. That's you becoming the person you were always meant to be. You know you're healing through integration when you make space for the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it shakes you, even when it calls you to confront parts of yourself you used to avoid. That's not easy. It takes courage to welcome the truth in a world and a mind that often prefers illusions. It takes strength to look at the parts of your story that don't make you proud, the parts that hurt, the parts that you buried so deep you almost forgot they were there. See, when you're still in survival mode, denial can feel like protection. You tell yourself what you need to hear just to get through the day. I'm fine. It wasn't that bad. I moved. You wear those statements like armor because facing the real story, your real emotions, your real pain, your real mistakes feels like it could break you. But what integration teaches you is this: Truth doesn't break you. Avoiding it does. Healing doesn't mean rewriting your past. It means reclaiming it. It means saying, yes, I hurt. Yes, I hurt. Yes, I made choices I regret. And yes, I am still worthy. I am still evolving. I am still whole. That's the moment everything starts to shift, because you stop living in fragments. You stop rejecting parts of yourself, and you begin to weave all the pieces, light and dark, strength and struggle, into one story. When you integrate, truth becomes your foundation, not your enemy. You start telling yourself the truth about your patterns. You stop blaming others for everything and start owning your role. So, not to beat yourself up, but to liberate yourself. You stop pretending your childhood didn't leave scars. You stop pretending that relationship didn't change you. You stop pretending that smile you wear in public is always real. You get honest, and that honesty, sets you free. There's a quiet, revolutionary power in looking at your reflection, flaws, regrets, lessons, and all, and saying, I see you. That's not weakness. That's maturity. That's integrity. And the more you practice it, the less shame holds you, because shame survives in silence and secrecy. But when you bring truth to light, shame begins to wither. You no longer have to keep hiding behind perfection or performance. You're able to show up authentically, fully, completely as you are. This doesn't mean you dump your whole past on everyone you meet. It doesn't mean you lose all boundaries. It means you stop hiding from yourself. It means the stories you used to whisper with fear, you now hold with compassion. The moments you used to suppress, you can now revisit without being consumed by them. You can speak truth to yourself in a way that empowers, not destroys. That's how you know healing is happening, not because the pain is gone, but because it no longer has the power to silence your truth. People who are integrating don't flinch at self-reflection. They seek it. They're hungry for clarity. They don't run from accountability. They embrace it. Because they know the only way to grow is through, not around. And they also understand this. Truth is layered. You may not see it all at once. But every time you choose to look a little deeper, to listen a little closer, to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to escape it, you move one step closer to wholeness. You begin to trust yourself more. Because when you're honest with yourself, you know you're not pretending. You know your peace is built on something real. And that kind of peace, it's unshakable. That kind of strength, it's not loud, but it's solid. That's what integration feels like. You're no longer editing yourself to fit someone else's version of you. You're living in alignment with what's real. And maybe the most powerful part, you realize that the truth, as uncomfortable as it may be, is never your enemy. It's your invitation, your teacher, your liberation. You know you're healing through integration when you start to forgive yourself, not by forgetting what happened, not by pretending it didn't matter, but by holding your past with compassion, learning from it, and choosing to move forward. That kind of forgiveness is not passive. It's not some fluffy idea where you just let it go and everything magically resets. No, it's deliberate, it's gritty, it takes deep intentional work, and it changes your life. See, when you're not healed, you walk around with invisible weights tied to your back. You replay the moments you wish you could undo, the words you said when you were angry, the chances you didn't take, the signs you ignored, the people you hurt, and the ways you let yourself down. And every time you think about them, there's a voice inside that whispers, you should have known better. That voice, that's shame, that's judgment. That's the internal prison many people live in without even realizing it. But integration is what sets you free. Because integration says, yes, that happened. Yes, I made those choices, but I'm not going to keep punishing myself. I'm going to sit with the lesson, not the guilt. You begin to separate your actions from your identity. You stop defining yourself by your worst moment. That's powerful. No, that's powerful because it means you believe you are more than the sum of your mistakes. And when you truly believe that, you give yourself room to grow. Forgiving yourself doesn't mean you dismiss the consequences. It doesn't mean you avoid accountability. In fact, it's the opposite. It means you face your truth fully, but without the poison of self-hate. You start asking, what did that experience teach me? Who was I back then? And what did I need that I didn't know how to ask for? You get curious, you explore, and eventually you replace judgment with understanding. That's how healing happens. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is not someone else. It's the version of you that didn't know how to cope, that accepted less than you deserved, that stayed too long, lashed out, broke down, gave up. But here's the truth. You did the best you could with the tools and awareness you had at that time. And maybe now you see it clearly. Maybe now you have better tools. That's what growth looks like. And you don't have to hate who you were to become who you are. The moment you stop asking, why did I do that, with resentment, and start asking it with compassion, is the moment you reclaim your power. That's self-forgiveness. That's when you stop letting your past dominate your present. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop over-compensating. You stop believing you have to earn your right to peace, to love, to joy. You understand that healing isn't a reward for perfection. It's a right. It's your birthright. When you integrate, you stop hiding your history. You start owning it. Not proudly, but responsibly. You know what happened. You know who you hurt. You know what it cost you, and still you hold space for your own humanity. You remind yourself, I'm still learning. I'm still becoming. I'm still worthy. That's what brings peace, not erasure, but acceptance. And over time, the memories that used to sting begin to soften. The regret that used to suffocate you starts to loosen its grip. You begin to breathe again. You begin to show up differently, wiser, gentler, more grounded. Not because you're pretending it didn't happen, but because you've grown from it. You've honored the lesson and released the punishment. That's when you know the healing is real, when you can hold your past without being trapped by it, when you can speak your story without shame, when you look in the mirror and say, I forgive you, we're moving forward now. That's not weakness. That's the deepest kind of strength. That's the quiet revolution of self-forgiveness. That's what integration feels like. You know you're healing through integration when you can feel your emotions deeply, fully, but they no longer control you. That shift, that subtle but powerful change, is one of the clearest signs that you're no longer living at the mercy of your emotional storms. It doesn't mean you've stopped feeling. On the contrary, you're feeling more than ever. But now your emotions are part of the conversation, not the whole thing. They no longer hijack your clarity, your behavior, or your identity. You've stepped into emotional leadership. In the early stages of pain or trauma, emotions often run the show. Anger lashes out before your mind can catch up. Sadness pulls you into isolation without warning. Anxiety makes decisions for you: where to go, who to trust, how to live. It's not weakness, it's survival. It's your nervous system doing what it had to do. But when healing begins, something remarkable starts to happen. You become aware. You start noticing the waves instead of drowning in them. You start naming what you feel. That's the power of integration, not emotional suppression, but emotional regulation, not silencing what you feel, but learning how to feel it without losing yourself in it. You stop running from discomfort. You sit with it. You let it pass through you like weather, knowing it's not permanent, knowing you are strong enough to hold space for your experience. That's not just growth, that's emotional intelligence at work. Maybe before, anger used to explode. Now it prompts reflection. You ask, what boundary was crossed? What value of mine is being ignored? Maybe sadness used to swallow your whole day. Now it becomes a signal, an invitation to slow down, to tend to yourself, to grieve something you haven't had the space to grieve yet. And when joy shows up, instead of feeling suspicious of it or waiting for the other shoe to drop, you let yourself feel it fully, without guilt. That's healing too, allowing joy. When you're no longer reactive, you give yourself a new kind of freedom, the ability to pause. That pause is where your power lives. It's where you choose a new path, a new response, a new narrative. Instead of yelling back, you breathe. Instead of shutting down, you speak up honestly, calmly, clearly. That shift doesn't always look dramatic on the outside, but on the inside, it's revolutionary. And let's be clear, this doesn't mean you become emotionless. It doesn't mean you walk around unaffected. It means you stopped being defined by your emotions. You can feel deeply and still act wisely. You can hurt and still love. You can be scared and still move forward. That's emotional maturity. That's balance. The beauty of integration is that it brings harmony to your inner world, your heart, your mind, your body. They begin to sync up. You're no longer living in extremes. You're not stuck in high highs and low lows. You're grounded, present. You can cry without shame. You can express anger without violence. You can hold grief without being consumed. You've earned your peace, not by avoiding your emotions, but by learning how to live with them. This kind of emotional regulation doesn't just change how you relate to yourself. It changes how you relate to everyone around you. Your relationships improve. Your communication deepens. Your energy stabilizes. People begin to feel safe around you, not because you're perfect, but because you're present. You're consistent. That's the result of real healing. And when you can stand in the middle of an emotional wave and say, this is here, but this is not all of me, you know you've grown. You've integrated. You're not avoiding anymore. You're embracing. You're allowing. You're choosing. That's what healing through integration looks like. And that's the kind of emotional freedom that changes everything. You know you're healing through integration when you stop chasing validation and start building inner value. This might be one of the most profound shifts in your healing journey, not just because it changes how you see yourself, but because it changes how you operate in the world. When you begin to truly integrate your past, your wounds, and your worth, you no longer live for the applause, the likes, the compliments, or the approval of others. You live from within. You start recognizing that your value was never meant to be outsourced. Let's be honest, before healing, many of us look outward to feel whole. We shape shift to be accepted. We bend over backward to be liked. We perform, we please, we prove, and we do it because somewhere deep down we were taught by trauma, by conditioning, by experience that who we are on our own isn't enough. So we reach outside ourselves for worth. We seek validation to fill the void. We need the job title, the relationship, the compliments, the social media attention to remind us that we matter. And when it's not there, we feel empty, invisible, rejected. But when healing through begins, you start turning inward. You start asking, what do I believe about myself when no one's watching? What do I think I'm worth when no one is clapping? And as you sit with those questions, you realize something powerful. Your worth has never been tied to anyone else's opinion. It was always yours to claim. You begin to detach your value from performance. You stop overworking just to feel useful. You stop overgiving just to feel needed. You stop saying yes when you really mean a no just to avoid conflict. That is no longer how you define connection. Because now you're building something stronger, self-respect. You're learning to validate yourself in quiet, consistent ways, through the choices you make, through the boundaries you set, through the way you treat yourself when no one else is looking. This doesn't mean you become arrogant or closed off. It means you become grounded. You don't need to shout your worth from the rooftops because you live it in your actions. You're no longer a prisoner of people's opinions. Praise feels nice, but it doesn't define you. Criticism may sting, but it doesn't destroy you. You've developed an internal compass and you trust it. That's what happens when you've integrated the parts of yourself that once felt unlovable, unworthy, or invisible. And you know what else changes? You begin to choose differently. You stop entering rooms where you have to shrink yourself to be accepted. You stop chasing people who only see your worth when you're performing. You start surrounding yourself with those who value your being, not just your doing, because now you see your own light. You've reclaimed it. You don't need to earn it anymore. This self-validation doesn't come from ego. It comes from truth. It comes from a quiet, steady knowing. I've been through the fire and I'm still here. I faced my shadows and I didn't run. I've looked myself in the eye and chose to stay. That kind of worth isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It's rooted. It's real. And yes, some days you may still want the applause. That's human. But now when you don't get it, you don't fall apart. You remember who you are. You return to yourself because your worth is no longer up for debate. It's not a vote. It's a fact. So when you notice yourself no longer performing for love, no longer begging for attention, no longer needing external validation just to feel whole, that's not small. That's healing. That's integration. That's you finally becoming the source of your own value. And that is where freedom begins. You know you're healing through integration when the past no longer dictates your present choices. That doesn't mean you forget what happened. It doesn't mean you erase the memories or pretend the pain was never real. It means you're no longer controlled by it. You faced the story, honored the lessons, and now you get to decide what comes next without being dragged by who you used to be or what you went through. That's the power of true integration. That's how you know the work is working. When you're still in survival mode, the past becomes a filter for everything. Every decision, every relationship, every opportunity gets weighed against what once went wrong. You avoid love because you were once betrayed. You avoid taking risks because you once failed. You keep your guard up because someone broke your trust, And it's not because you're weak. It's because pain creates patterns are designed to protect you, not to free you. But here's the problem. Protection without awareness becomes a prison. You stay in your comfort zone, not because it's fulfilling, but because it's familiar. You start confusing safety with stagnation. You build walls instead of boundaries. And before you know it, your entire life becomes a reaction to your past rather than a conscious creation of your future. That's where many people get stuck. Healing through integration breaks that cycle. It invites you to step back and say, wait, I'm not that same person anymore. I've grown, I've learned, and I deserve to live a life that reflects who I am now, not who I had to be just to survive. That's when you start choosing from clarity instead of fear. That's when you begin to recognize that your past isn't your blueprint. It's just one chapter in your story. You might still feel the echoes of old pain. The memory might still knock on your door from time to time. But now you have the tools to meet it with presence. You don't let it steer the wheel. You acknowledge it, you sit with it if needed, and then you move forward with intention. That's the shift. That's how you reclaim your power. When you're integrated, you don't avoid the past, you alchemize it. You use it to fuel your wisdom, not your worry. You don't deny what happened, but you no longer live in reaction to it. You understand the difference between a memory and a mandate. Just because it happened before doesn't mean it has to happen again. Just because you were hurt doesn't mean love isn't safe. Just because you failed doesn't mean success isn't possible. This level of healing shows up in subtle but significant ways. You find yourself saying yes to things that scared you before. You open your heart without bracing for impact. You make decisions that reflect your current self, not your wounded self. And when fear does show up, because it still will, you don't run. You walk with it, you listen to it, but you don't let it drive. That's emotional maturity. That's integration in action. And this shift isn't just for you, it affects everything around you. Your relationships become more authentic. Your work becomes more aligned. Your boundaries become clearer. Why? Because you're not operating from defense anymore. You're operating from intention. You're choosing your life, not just coping with it. So when you catch yourself making decisions based on who you are now, rather than what you've been through, pause, acknowledge that. That's not small. That's evidence of deep transformation. That's a sign that the wounds didn't win, you did. Because healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be, free, whole, and empowered to create a life that honors both your past and your potential. And when you get there, that's not just healing, that's liberation. You know you're healing through integration when you stop needing to fix everything and everyone. When you no longer carry the unbearable pressure to control outcomes, manage other people's emotions, or constantly be the problem solver. Instead, you begin to understand something vital. Not everything is yours to hold. Not every fire is yours to put out. Not every burden is yours to carry.